My name is Madison Harper, and I'm 27 years old. The phone call that changed everything came on a Tuesday morning while I was preparing coffee in my small Portland apartment. My family lawyer's voice trembled as he delivered news that shattered my world completely. My father had died, and somehow, impossibly, I was named the sole heir to his $12 million estate. The family, who had disowned me 13 years ago, was now demanding answers they didn't deserve. But the most devastating revelation was yet to come when I discovered that my sister Brittany had been intercepting every single attempt I'd made to contact my parents for over a decade. Before we dive into this incredible journey of betrayal, survival, and ultimate truth, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. Please hit that like button if you're ready for a story that will completely change how you think about family loyalty, and don't forget to subscribe, because this tale of deception runs deeper than you could ever imagine. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next when I reveal how one person's jealousy destroyed an entire family for more than a decade. Looking back to when I was 14 years old, our family seemed like something straight out of a magazine advertisement for the American dream. We lived in a beautiful colonial house in suburban Connecticut, complete with white picket fence and manicured gardens that my mother Caroline tended with obsessive care. My father Richard Harper had built a successful real estate development company from nothing, and his pride in our family's achievements was evident in every conversation. Mom worked as an interior designer, transforming houses into homes with her impeccable taste and attention to detail that made clients across 3 counties seek her services. My sister Brittany, 2 years older than me, appeared to be the golden child that every parent dreams of having. She maintained perfect grades, served as captain of the cheerleading squad, and participated in student government with an enthusiasm that teachers constantly praised. Her bedroom walls were covered with certificates, ribbons, and photographs documenting her seemingly endless list of accomplishments. When friends visited our house, they would comment on how lucky our parents were to have such a perfect daughter, and Brittany would flash that brilliant smile that could charm anyone within seconds. But I had my own special place in the family dynamic as well, something that made me feel equally valued and loved. Art had always been my passion and natural talent, flowing from my fingers like breathing whenever I picked up a pencil, paintbrush, or charcoal stick. My drawings covered our refrigerator, and my paintings hung proudly in Dad's office where clients would frequently comment on the incredible skill displayed by someone so young. When I won the state-wide art competition at 15, beating out hundreds of high school students despite being just a freshman, the celebration dinner lasted for hours, as my parents beamed with pride and talked excitedly about my potential scholarship opportunities to prestigious art schools. That victory should have been pure joy, but I noticed something different in Brittany's congratulations that night. Her smile seemed forced, lasting just a few seconds longer than natural, and her praise felt rehearsed rather than genuine. She hugged me tightly and said all the right words about being proud of her talented little sister, but there was something cold behind her eyes that I couldn't quite identify at the time. Looking back now, I realize that was the moment when her jealousy first began to take root and grow into something much more dangerous than simple sibling rivalry. Our family traditions were sacred rituals that brought us together every week. Sunday dinners featured Mom's incredible cooking while we shared stories about our week, and Dad would quiz us about current events, or help with homework that challenged us. Summer vacations took us to different states where we'd explore national parks, visit museums, and create memories that filled multiple photo albums. Brittany and I shared a bedroom until she turned 16, staying up late talking about boys, dreams, and futures we couldn't wait to experience together as sisters and best friends. I trusted Brittany completely during those early years, sharing every secret, fear, and aspiration with someone I believed would always protect and support me. When I worried about fitting in at school or struggled with particularly difficult math concepts, she would listen patiently and offer advice that seemed wise beyond her years. She knew about my crush on Tommy Richardson, my insecurity about being shorter than most girls in my grade, and my secret dream of studying at the Rhode Island School of Design someday. I thought our bond was unbreakable, built on years of shared experiences and genuine sisterly love that would last throughout our entire lives. The first signs of manipulation were so subtle that I dismissed them as misunderstandings or accidents. Brittany would sometimes take credit for ideas I had suggested, claiming she had mentioned them first during family conversations. She began offering to help with my art projects, then would accidentally damage them or suggest changes that diminished their impact. When I questioned these incidents, she would apologize so sincerely and seem so genuinely upset about the mistakes that I felt guilty for suspecting her of deliberate sabotage. As my artistic recognition continued to grow, receiving praise from teachers and winning additional competitions, I noticed Brittany's behavior becoming increasingly unpredictable. She would alternate between excessive praise for my work and subtle criticism that planted seeds of doubt about my abilities. Sometimes she would hide my art supplies or forget to give me important messages about deadlines for contests and submissions. When I confronted her about these issues, she would cry and claim that stress from her demanding academic schedule was making her forgetful and careless with my belongings. The letter that would change everything arrived on a crisp October morning during my sophomore year. The Rhode Island School of Design had not only accepted my early application, but offered a full scholarship that would cover tuition, room, board, and art supplies for 4 years. My parents were ecstatic, immediately calling relatives and friends to share the incredible news about their daughter's achievement. The celebration lasted for days, with neighbors stopping by to congratulate me and teachers at school announcing my success during morning announcements. But even as I basked in the glory of this incredible opportunity, I couldn't shake the feeling that Brittany's enthusiasm was hollow and forced. She participated in all the celebrations, posed for pictures with me, and spoke excitedly about visiting me at college, but something felt fundamentally wrong with her reactions. Late at night, I would catch her staring at me with an expression I couldn't interpret, and she began asking detailed questions about the scholarship requirements and deadlines that seemed unnecessarily probing. I had no idea that this acceptance letter had triggered a plan that would ultimately destroy everything I thought I knew about my family and my place within it. By the time I reached 16, my art had evolved beyond simple teenage sketches into sophisticated pieces that captured the attention of professional gallery owners and art critics throughout New England. The portfolio I had spent months preparing for the National Young Artists Competition represented my best work, featuring mixed media pieces that explored themes of identity, family bonds, and the transition from childhood to adulthood. Each piece told a story, and together they created a narrative about growing up that resonated with viewers far beyond my age group. The portfolio lived in a special flat file in my bedroom, organized meticulously with protective sleeves and careful labeling that would make submission and transportation simple and safe. I had photographed each piece multiple times, created detailed documentation, and prepared artist statements that explained my creative process and inspiration. This competition could open doors to exhibitions, mentorship opportunities, and additional scholarships that would secure my artistic future beyond anything I had dared to dream possible. 3 days before the submission deadline, I discovered my portfolio had been completely destroyed. Paint had been poured across several pieces, others were torn beyond repair, and my carefully crafted artist statements had been shredded into tiny pieces scattered across my bedroom floor. The devastation was so complete and deliberate that there was no possibility of salvaging anything or recreating the work in time for submission. I stood in my doorway, sobbing hysterically as months of dedicated effort dissolved into ruined scraps of paper and canvas. Brittany found me there 20 minutes later, immediately wrapping her arms around me and expressing horror and sympathy that seemed absolutely genuine. She helped me clean up the destroyed artwork while tears streamed down her face, repeatedly saying how sorry she was that this terrible accident had happened to someone who worked so incredibly hard on their art. Together we gathered the ruined pieces, and she suggested that perhaps I had been careless with paint containers or forgotten to secure the portfolio properly after working late the previous evening. When our parents returned from their anniversary dinner that night, Brittany took charge of explaining the situation with a precision that should have raised red flags. She described finding me devastated in my room, surrounded by destroyed artwork that appeared to have been damaged by my own carelessness and irresponsibility. According to her version of events, I had been rushing to finish last-minute additions to my portfolio and had accidentally knocked over multiple paint containers that ruined everything beyond repair. My desperate attempts to explain that someone had deliberately destroyed my work fell on deaf ears. Dad questioned why I would wait until the last minute to make changes, while Mom expressed disappointment in my lack of organization and attention to detail. They both seemed more concerned about the mess and wasted art supplies than the fact that months of my hard work had been completely eliminated. Brittany stood behind them, nodding sympathetically and occasionally adding details that supported their growing belief that I was becoming unreliable and careless with important responsibilities. The first major attack escalated within weeks, when Brittany discovered an even more devastating way to undermine my credibility and relationship with our parents. She began planting small amounts of marijuana in my bedroom, hiding it in places where she knew our mother would eventually find it during routine cleaning or laundry collection. The discovery happened during a surprise room inspection that Brittany had suggested to our parents, claiming she was worried about my recent mood changes and declining academic performance. When Mom found the small baggie hidden in my dresser drawer, her screams brought Dad running from his home office, and both parents confronted me with evidence of drug use that I couldn't explain or deny effectively. My frantic protestations of innocence only seemed to confirm their worst fears about my character and the direction my life was taking. Brittany stood in the doorway during this confrontation, playing the role of concerned older sister, who had tried to help me but feared I was spiraling out of control. The punishment was swift and comprehensive, involving grounding that lasted for months, removal of all art supplies from my room, and constant supervision that made every moment feel like imprisonment. My parents implemented random room searches, monitored my phone calls, and required detailed explanations of my whereabouts whenever I left the house. The trust we had built over 16 years evaporated completely, replaced by suspicion and disappointment that colored every interaction with the people I loved most in the world. During this nightmare, one person emerged as a beacon of hope and support when everyone else had abandoned me. Mrs. Thompson, my art teacher, noticed my sudden absence from after-school art club and the dramatic change in my demeanor during class. When I finally confessed what had happened at home, she listened without judgment and offered to speak with my parents on my behalf. Her faith in my character and artistic integrity provided the only validation I received during those dark months when my own family treated me like a stranger who couldn't be trusted. Brittany's manipulation tactics became increasingly sophisticated as she perfected the art of playing victim while orchestrating my destruction behind the scenes. In private, she would offer comfort and support, claiming to believe in my innocence and promising to help convince our parents that they were being too harsh. But during family discussions about my behavior, she would reluctantly share concerns about my mood swings, secretive behavior, and angry outbursts that painted a picture of escalating problems. Her performance was flawless, complete with tears and expressions of genuine worry for her little sister, who seemed to be making dangerous choices. She would volunteer information about finding me acting suspiciously, mention conversations where I had seemed defensive or hostile, and suggest that perhaps professional intervention might be necessary to help me get back on track. Our parents hung on every word, grateful to have one daughter they could trust to provide honest insights about family dynamics. The isolation within my own home became suffocating, as every achievement was viewed with skepticism, and every mistake was seen as confirmation of deeper problems. When I managed to maintain good grades, despite the restrictions and emotional turmoil, my parents assumed I was cheating or receiving inappropriate help from teachers who felt sorry for me. When my art teacher submitted one of my pieces to a local exhibition without my knowledge, their pride was overshadowed by concerns that I was manipulating adults who didn't understand the full extent of my behavioral issues. Brittany's fake support in private became another layer of psychological torture that left me questioning my own sanity and perception of reality. She would sneak into my room late at night, offering hugs and reassurance while simultaneously planting new seeds of doubt about my memory and judgment. According to her carefully crafted narrative, I was experiencing stress-related memory issues that made me forget things I had said or done, which explained why my version of events never matched what our parents believed had happened. The grounding stretched through autumn and into winter, effectively isolating me from friends, extracurricular activities, and any opportunities to demonstrate responsibility or rebuild trust with my family. My portfolio for college applications remained empty, my artistic development stagnated without access to proper supplies, and my relationship with our parents deteriorated further with each passing week. I had no idea that this was only the beginning of Brittany's master plan to completely eliminate me from our family's future. My 17th year began with college preparation activities that should have been exciting milestones, but instead became sources of increasing anxiety and confusion. Despite maintaining excellent grades and rebuilding some trust through consistent good behavior, I struggled to navigate the complex application processes for art schools while dealing with restrictions that limited my access to guidance counselors and college preparation resources. Brittany had volunteered to help me organize deadlines and requirements, presenting herself as the supportive older sister who wanted to ensure my success despite our family's recent difficulties. What I didn't realize was that Brittany had begun systematically sabotaging my college applications through subtle changes to deadlines, requirements, and submission procedures that would cause me to miss opportunities without understanding why. She would offer to mail application materials on my behalf, then hold them for several days past deadlines before disposing of them completely. When I called schools to verify receipt of my materials, she would intercept return calls and provide false information about missing documents or incomplete submissions that required restarting entire processes. The confusion and stress of missing multiple application deadlines, despite careful preparation, convinced our parents that I was still struggling with organization and responsibility issues that made me unsuitable for independence. Dad began questioning whether art school was realistic for someone who couldn't manage basic administrative tasks, while Mom suggested that perhaps community college would be more appropriate for my current level of maturity and capability. My attempts to explain that something was interfering with my application processes were dismissed as excuse-making and failure to accept responsibility for my mistakes. Brittany would sadly confirm that she had tried to help me stay organized, but that I seemed overwhelmed by the complexity of college preparation and frequently forgot important deadlines despite her reminders. Her performance of concerned disappointment was so convincing that even I began to doubt my own memory and organizational abilities. The second major betrayal came during our annual Thanksgiving gathering, when extended family members, who had known and loved me since birth, suddenly treated me with cool distance and obvious suspicion. Grandparents, who had previously celebrated my artistic achievements, now asked pointed questions about my future plans, with skeptical expressions that suggested they expected disappointment. Aunts and uncles who had once praised my creativity and intelligence now offered generic pleasantries before quickly changing subjects to safer topics. During the traditional post-dinner gathering in our living room, the atmosphere changed dramatically when my grandmother's antique necklace went missing from her purse. The beautiful pearl and gold piece had been a family heirloom for 3 generations, and Grandma was devastated by its disappearance. A thorough search of the house yielded nothing, and suspicion quickly focused on family members who might have had opportunity and motive to take such a valuable item. Brittany suggested searching everyone's personal belongings to eliminate any possibility of accidental misplacement, presenting the idea as a way to clear everyone's name and focus the search on other possibilities. When the necklace was discovered in my jacket pocket, the silence that followed felt like a physical blow that knocked all air from my lungs. The disappointment and anger on my family's faces confirmed their worst beliefs about my character and the direction my life had taken. My frantic denials and protests of innocence fell on ears that had already heard too many similar claims over the past year. Uncle Robert shook his head sadly and commented that he had hoped the family rumors about my problems weren't true, while Aunt Susan hugged my parents and whispered condolences, as if someone had died. The shame and embarrassment on Mom and Dad's faces was almost worse than the anger, because it showed how completely their faith in me had been destroyed. Brittany's reaction was perfectly calculated to appear supportive, while reinforcing everyone's growing conviction that I had serious problems requiring intervention. She defended me tearfully, claiming that stress and family pressure might have caused me to make poor choices that didn't reflect my true character. Her willingness to stand by me despite overwhelming evidence appeared generous and sisterly, while actually highlighting how obvious my guilt seemed to everyone else. The revelation that would make this betrayal even more devastating came years later, when I learned that Brittany's boyfriend Troy Henderson had been actively participating in these elaborate schemes designed to destroy my reputation. Troy had access to our house through his relationship with Brittany, opportunities to plant evidence during family gatherings, and motivation to help his girlfriend eliminate competition for parental attention and family resources. As if the jewelry incident wasn't enough, I discovered that our cousin Jessica had also joined Brittany's campaign against me, spreading rumors throughout our extended family about my alleged drug use, theft, and behavioral problems. Jessica's participation added credibility to Brittany's claims, because she appeared to be an independent source of information rather than a potentially biased sister. Her willingness to share concerns about my character convinced relatives, who might have otherwise questioned the allegations against someone they had watched grow up. The combination of these multiple sources confirming similar stories created an overwhelming consensus that I had become someone dangerous and untrustworthy who needed to be handled carefully to prevent further damage to family relationships. Holiday gatherings became tense affairs where conversations stopped when I entered rooms, and relatives watched me with expressions ranging from pity to suspicion. The unconditional love and acceptance I had taken for granted throughout my childhood disappeared completely, replaced by conditional tolerance that depended on perfect behavior and constant proof of rehabilitation. My academic performance began suffering under the weight of emotional stress, social isolation, and constant family conflict that made concentration nearly impossible. Teachers noticed my declining participation in class discussions, missed assignments that had never been problems before, and artwork that reflected darker themes than my previous optimistic creations. The downward spiral seemed to confirm everyone's belief that I was struggling with serious issues that required professional intervention. The depression that followed felt like drowning in plain sight, while everyone I loved stood on the shore offering criticism instead of rescue. My art became my only outlet for processing emotions too complex and painful for words, but even that sanctuary was compromised by family members who viewed my darker subject matter as evidence of concerning mental health issues. The themes of betrayal, isolation, and family dysfunction that appeared in my work were dismissed as adolescent drama rather than legitimate, artistic expression of real experiences. The first near defeat came during my 18th birthday celebration, which turned into a family intervention rather than a party. Instead of gifts and cake, I received ultimatums about getting professional help for my problems and detailed plans for supervision that would continue until I demonstrated consistent improvement. The birthday dinner included extended family members who took turns expressing their love for me while outlining their concerns about my choices and behavior patterns. When I couldn't handle another moment of being treated like a criminal in my own home, I excused myself to the bathroom and seriously considered ending my life rather than facing years of being viewed as the family failure who had disappointed everyone. The bottle of pills in the medicine cabinet seemed like a reasonable solution to pain that felt unbearable and permanent. Only the thought of Mrs. Thompson finding out that her faith in me had been wasted prevented me from taking steps that couldn't be undone. The suicide attempt happened 3 weeks later, when the isolation and constant criticism finally overwhelmed my ability to cope with daily life. I took enough pills to require hospitalization, but not enough to cause permanent damage, though I spent several days in intensive care while doctors monitored my recovery. The family's reaction to this desperate cry for help was to blame me for seeking attention and manipulating everyone's emotions rather than recognizing the depth of pain that had driven me to such extreme measures. During my hospital stay, I met Dr. Martinez, a counselor who became the second adult to provide validation and support when my entire world had collapsed. She listened to my story without judgment, helped me understand that the treatment I was receiving at home was not normal or acceptable, and began working with me to develop coping strategies for surviving what she recognized as systematic emotional abuse. Her belief in my sanity and worth provided a lifeline during the darkest period of my adolescence. Senior year arrived with the promise of escape through college acceptance, but Brittany's schemes had evolved into something far more sophisticated and devastating than simple sibling rivalry. At 18, I was desperately focused on graduating and leaving for college, unaware that my sister was orchestrating the most elaborate and destructive phase of her campaign to eliminate me from our family permanently. The foundation she had laid over years of smaller betrayals was about to support a master plan that would convince everyone I loved that I was beyond redemption. The third major attack began with what appeared to be Brittany's own crisis that somehow became my fault through twisted logic that only she could have devised. She claimed to be pregnant from a relationship she had kept secret from our parents, then dramatically confessed during a family dinner that my bad influence had introduced her to a crowd of older students who used drugs and engaged in reckless sexual behavior. According to her tearful testimony, my rebellion and poor choices had normalized risky behavior that led to her making decisions she deeply regretted. Her performance that night was worthy of an Academy Award, complete with genuine tears, shaking hands, and expressions of shame and regret that broke our parents' hearts, while simultaneously redirecting their anger toward me as the root cause of her problems. She claimed that watching me get away with drug use and theft had convinced her that such behavior was acceptable, leading her down a path that resulted in an unplanned pregnancy that would derail her college plans and future prospects. The pregnancy scare turned out to be false, but not before it had served its purpose of convincing our parents that my influence on Brittany was toxic and dangerous. Dad spent hours lecturing me about responsibility and consequences, while Mom cried about the ways my choices were destroying both of her daughters' futures. The fact that Brittany had apparently learned these behaviors from watching me made my rebellion seem even more selfish and destructive than they had previously believed. What I couldn't have known at the time was that Brittany's secret relationship was not with a fellow student, but with Mr. Patterson, a married family friend who was 20 years older than her. Their affair had been ongoing for months, hidden behind the facade of tutoring sessions and family-friend interactions that gave them opportunities to meet without arousing suspicion. Brittany was using this inappropriate relationship as leverage against Mr. Patterson, while simultaneously using it as a weapon against me by claiming the pregnancy resulted from peer pressure I had created. The fourth attack came just weeks before graduation, when I discovered that 18 years of birthday money, Christmas gifts, and college savings had disappeared from my bank account. The $12,000 that was supposed to fund my first year of college had been systematically withdrawn over several months through transactions that appeared legitimate, but that I had never authorized. My parents' initial reaction was to assume I had spent the money on drugs or other irresponsible purchases, despite my complete shock and confusion about the missing funds. When bank records showed that the withdrawals had been made using my debit card and personal identification number, my desperate claims of innocence seemed like obvious lies designed to avoid consequences for my poor financial choices. The fact that I couldn't provide receipts or explanations for how the money had been spent only reinforced their belief that I was lying about something too embarrassing or illegal to admit. Brittany's suggestion that drug addiction might explain my memory loss and financial irresponsibility provided a convenient explanation that our parents readily accepted. The truth about the stolen identity documents that had made these withdrawals possible wouldn't emerge until years later, when private investigators uncovered the systematic identity theft that Brittany had been committing since my 16th birthday. She had carefully copied my social security number, driver's license information, and bank account details to create duplicate identification that allowed her to access my money while creating evidence that would implicate me in financial irresponsibility if anyone questioned the missing funds. The discovery of my empty college fund 1 week before graduation felt like the final blow that would prevent any possibility of escape or independence. Without financial resources to pay for college, my acceptance letters became meaningless pieces of paper that reminded me of dreams that were no longer achievable. The timing seemed designed to cause maximum despair and hopelessness, ensuring that even if I graduated, I would have no realistic options for building a life away from family supervision and control. The betrayal that hurt most during this period came from my best friend Sarah, who had been my confidant and supporter throughout years of family turmoil. Brittany's rumors about my drug use, theft, and psychological problems had gradually poisoned Sarah's perception of our friendship, leading her to question whether my complaints about family treatment were legitimate or symptoms of deeper issues that made me unreliable and manipulative. When Sarah finally confronted me about the stories she had heard, her accusations felt like losing the last person who had believed in my character and innocence. She had heard from multiple sources that I was using drugs regularly, stealing from family members, and lying about being unfairly treated when I was actually the source of most family problems. The fact that these stories came from my own sister gave them credibility that was impossible to overcome with denials or explanations. The complete isolation that resulted from losing my best friend's support marked the end of my ability to maintain any social connections or emotional support systems outside my family. Teachers had been warned about my problems by concerned relatives, classmates had heard rumors about my character, and even Mrs. Thompson had been asked by school administrators to limit her involvement with a student whose family was dealing with serious behavioral issues. Graduation day should have been a celebration of academic achievement and the beginning of adult independence, but instead it became another opportunity for family humiliation and control. I was forbidden from attending the ceremony as punishment for the missing college fund, locked in my room while my classmates celebrated accomplishments we had worked toward together for 4 years. Through my bedroom window, I could see cars heading toward the school where my empty seat would remind everyone of my absence and the disappointment I had caused. The breaking point came that evening when I realized that staying in this house for even one more day would either drive me completely insane or lead to another suicide attempt that might not fail. The systematic destruction of my reputation, relationships, and future prospects had been so thorough and effective that I could see no possibility of redemption or reconciliation with people who viewed me as fundamentally damaged and dangerous. The decision to run away rather than face more years of emotional abuse felt like choosing life over death, even though it meant abandoning everything familiar and starting over with nothing but the clothes on my back. I had reached the point where unknown dangers seemed preferable to the certainty of continued persecution from people who were supposed to love and protect me. That night, I began planning an escape that would take me far enough away to begin rebuilding my life from scratch, though I had no idea how completely Brittany's lies would follow me even after I left home. My 18th birthday arrived not with celebration, but with a formal disownment ceremony that felt more like a funeral than a family gathering. Instead of birthday cake and presents, my parents presented me with legal documents that officially severed all family ties and financial responsibilities. They had consulted with attorneys to ensure that their decision to cut me off completely was legally binding and irreversible, demonstrating a level of planning that showed how thoroughly they had accepted Brittany's version of who I had become. The documents were comprehensive and devastating, covering everything from removal from family insurance policies to revocation of college fund access to formal declarations that I was no longer welcome in their home or at family gatherings. Dad read each section aloud with the same tone he used for business contracts, while Mom sat silently with tears streaming down her face, as if she was watching me die rather than simply leave home. Brittany stood behind them both, occasionally placing supportive hands on their shoulders while maintaining an expression of sad resignation. The $200 they gave me as a final gesture was presented as generous assistance rather than the bare minimum required to avoid charges of abandoning a minor. They explained that this money was more than I deserved given my behavior over the past few years, but that their Christian values prevented them from sending me into the world completely empty-handed. The condescending tone of this explanation made it clear that they viewed themselves as victims, who were being generous to someone who had caused them nothing but pain and embarrassment. I left that house with everything I owned packed into a single backpack, carrying clothes, a few art supplies, and the 18 years of memories that had been systematically poisoned by my sister's lies. The family photos lining the hallways showed a happy childhood that now seemed like fiction, and I wondered if I had imagined the love and acceptance that had once made me feel safe and valued. Walking away from the only home I had ever known felt like stepping off a cliff into an abyss with no idea where I might land. The first few months of survival were a crash course in adult realities that 18 years of privileged suburban living had never prepared me to face. Sleeping in my ancient Honda Civic meant waking up stiff and cold every morning, searching for public bathrooms where I could wash my face and brush my teeth before looking for work that would hire someone with no experience and no permanent address. The $200 lasted less than 2 weeks, spent on gas, food, and basic necessities that I had never appreciated when they appeared magically in my family's well-stocked home. Finding employment without a permanent address or professional references proved nearly impossible, forcing me to accept cash-paying jobs that were often dangerous or exploitative, but provided enough money to buy food and occasionally afford a night in a cheap motel. I worked as a dishwasher in restaurants that didn't ask questions, cleaned houses for people who paid daily wages, and picked up temporary labor jobs that left me exhausted but closer to earning enough money for security deposits on actual housing. The hunger was constant during those early months, making it difficult to think clearly about long-term planning when my immediate focus had to remain on finding enough food to maintain the energy needed for physical labor. I learned which fast food restaurants threw away edible food at closing time, which churches offered free meals without requiring religious participation, and how to make a single grocery shopping trip last for a week when carefully planned and supplemented with food bank visits. The most devastating attack came 6 months after I had finally managed to rent a small room in a boarding house and secure steady employment at a local diner. Brittany somehow tracked me down despite my efforts to remain invisible, arriving with Troy to deliver a final blow designed to eliminate any possibility of stability or success in my new life. They vandalized my car beyond repair, spray painting obscenities, and slashing tires in a way that made it clear this was personal rather than random crime. More damaging than the physical destruction was Brittany's campaign to poison my new employer against me by spreading the same lies that had destroyed my reputation at home. She visited the diner where I worked, speaking tearfully with my manager about her troubled sister, who had stolen from family members and used drugs regularly. According to her story, she had been searching for me to offer help and support, but felt obligated to warn people who might be affected by my behavioral problems. The manager, who had praised my work ethic and reliability, just days earlier suddenly viewed me with suspicion and concern, questioning whether someone with my family history could be trusted around cash registers and customer interactions. Despite my desperate attempts to explain that these allegations were false, the combination of property damage and family testimony created doubt that I couldn't overcome. I was terminated within a week, forced to forfeit my security deposit when I couldn't make rent without steady income. The pattern of harassment continued for months, as Brittany seemed determined to prevent me from establishing any stability or success that might allow me to rebuild my life. She would appear whenever I had managed to create something positive, armed with stories and evidence designed to convince employers, landlords, and potential friends that I was dangerous and untrustworthy. The systematic campaign felt like being hunted by someone who understood exactly where to strike for maximum damage. Eventually, I realized that remaining within driving distance of my family meant I would never be safe from Brittany's interference. The decision to move 3 states away felt like accepting permanent exile from everything familiar, but it was necessary to break the cycle of harassment that had made local stability impossible. I sold what few possessions I had accumulated, bought a bus ticket to Portland, Oregon, and started over again in a place where my sister's influence couldn't reach. The years that followed were a slow climb out of poverty and despair, marked by night school classes that I attended while working full-time jobs that barely covered basic living expenses. Community college provided a path back toward education and artistic development, though the pace of progress felt impossibly slow when measured against dreams I had once expected to achieve easily. Every small success felt like a victory against odds that had been deliberately stacked against me. I legally changed my last name to Brooks during my second year in Portland, creating a new identity that would be harder for my family to track if they ever decided to continue their campaign of harassment. The decision to abandon the Harper name felt like erasing part of myself, but it was necessary protection against people who had used my identity as a weapon to destroy opportunities for independence and success. The determination to prove everyone wrong became a driving force that sustained me through years of struggle and hardship. Every time I wanted to give up, or accept that maybe I really was the failure they claimed I had become, I remembered Mrs. Thompson's faith in my artistic ability and Dr. Martinez's recognition that the treatment I had received was neither normal nor deserved. Their voices in my head provided strength when my own confidence wavered. The emotional walls I built during these years of survival became both protection and prison, keeping me safe from additional betrayals while also preventing the kind of vulnerability required for genuine human connection. I learned to rely only on myself, to trust no one completely, and to maintain enough distance from others to ensure that their inevitable disappointment couldn't destroy me again. These survival skills would serve me well in building a new life, but would also create challenges in forming healthy relationships with people who genuinely cared about my well-being. Character development during this period taught me resilience I never knew I possessed, but it also planted seeds of hypervigilance and mistrust that would take years to overcome. Every success had to be protected carefully from people who might take it away. Every friendship remained superficial to prevent additional opportunities for betrayal, and every achievement felt temporary, because I had learned how quickly good things could disappear. By my 23rd birthday, Madison Brooks had emerged from the ashes of Madison Harper's destroyed life like a phoenix rising from carefully tended flames of determination and artistic passion. I had graduated from Portland Community College with honors, and my bachelor's degree in fine arts from a local university, and begun building a reputation as a freelance graphic designer whose work captured the attention of clients throughout the Pacific Northwest. The small apartment I called home represented everything my family had tried to prevent me from achieving: independence, stability, and success earned through my own efforts. The studio apartment in Portland's Arts District was modest, but entirely mine, featuring hardwood floors that showcased my artwork, and large windows that provided the natural light essential for detailed creative work. Every piece of furniture had been chosen carefully from thrift stores and estate sales, refinished by hand to create a living space that reflected my personal style rather than anyone else's expectations or requirements. The walls displayed paintings and drawings that chronicled my journey from despair to healing, creating a visual autobiography that reminded me daily of how far I had traveled. My artistic style had evolved during these years of independence, incorporating themes of betrayal, survival, and ultimately triumph that resonated with viewers who had experienced their own struggles with family dysfunction and personal adversity. The rawness of emotion in my work attracted attention from gallery owners and art critics who recognized authenticity that couldn't be taught or imitated. These weren't pretty pictures designed to match living room furniture, but honest explorations of human experience that demanded emotional responses from anyone willing to engage with them seriously. Elena Rodriguez, the gallery owner who became my mentor and champion, discovered my work during a local art walk where I had rented booth space to display recent paintings. She spent nearly an hour examining each piece, asking detailed questions about technique and inspiration that demonstrated genuine understanding of artistic process and vision. When she offered to represent my work in her gallery, it felt like validation from someone whose opinion carried weight in the local art community. Elena's gallery, Luminous Arts, featured emerging artists whose work challenged conventional expectations while demonstrating technical skill and emotional depth that separated serious art from mere decoration. Being included in her stable of represented artists meant access to collectors, critics, and opportunities that would have taken years to develop independently. More importantly, Elena became a mentor who understood the business side of artistic careers while respecting the creative integrity that made the work valuable. My first major exhibition, titled Fractured Bonds, opened on a rainy Thursday evening in February to a crowd that filled the gallery beyond capacity. The 12 large-scale paintings explored themes of family dysfunction, emotional abuse, and the possibility of healing after systematic betrayal. Each piece told part of a story that culminated in hope and renewal, though the journey depicted required viewers to confront uncomfortable truths about the potential for evil within seemingly normal families. The critical reception exceeded my wildest expectations, with reviews in local newspapers and art magazines that praised the emotional honesty and technical skill demonstrated throughout the collection. Sales were strong enough to provide financial security for months while I worked on my next series, and several pieces were acquired by collectors whose names Elena mentioned with obvious respect. More meaningful than commercial success was the response from visitors who connected deeply with themes that reflected their own experiences with family trauma and recovery. During the exhibition opening, I met Jake Williams, a photographer whose work appeared in the same galleries that now featured my paintings. His quiet confidence and genuine interest in my artistic journey felt different from the superficial charm that usually made me suspicious of new acquaintances. When he asked if I would be interested in collaborating on a project combining his photography with my painting techniques, his proposal felt like an opportunity for creative growth rather than potential exploitation. Jake's approach to our developing relationship demonstrated patience an understanding that gradually helped me lower defenses I had maintained for years. He never pushed for information I wasn't ready to share, respected boundaries I established without taking them personally, and consistently proved trustworthy in small ways that slowly built my confidence in his character. Our romance developed gradually over months of working together, sharing meals, and discovering common interests in art, music, and literature. The trust issues that affected our relationship were significant obstacles that required constant communication and patience from someone who had never experienced systematic betrayal. Jake's family background of healthy relationships and honest communication made it difficult for him to understand my hypervigilance around potential signs of deception or manipulation. When he made innocent comments that I interpreted as criticism or control, we had to work through my reactions carefully to separate past trauma from present reality. My financial situation improved dramatically as my artistic reputation grew and client base expanded to include major corporations, advertising agencies, and private collectors who commissioned custom pieces. The transition from survival mode to actual prosperity felt surreal, after years of counting every dollar and carefully rationing basic necessities. Having enough money to buy quality art supplies, maintain reliable transportation, and even save for future goals represented freedom that I had never expected to achieve. Despite external success, the internal conflict of missing family continued to create emotional challenges that therapy and time had not completely resolved. Holidays remained difficult reminders of traditions and connections that had been severed by circumstances beyond my control. Christmas mornings were particularly painful, filled with memories of family celebrations that had once made me feel loved and valued before everything changed so dramatically. The nightmares that plagued my sleep reflected ongoing trauma from years of psychological abuse disguised as family concern and intervention. These dreams often featured Brittany's face morphing into expressions of false sympathy while she systematically destroyed everything I cared about. Therapy sessions with Dr. Sarah Chen helped me develop coping strategies, but healing from such comprehensive betrayal proved to be an ongoing process rather than a destination I could reach and leave behind. Elena encouraged me to explore opportunities for exhibiting my work beyond Portland's regional art scene, suggesting that galleries in larger cities might provide exposure to national and international collectors. The prospect of expanding my career felt exciting, but also terrifying, because success brought visibility that could potentially alert my family to my whereabouts and achievements. Part of me wanted them to see how wrong they had been about my character and potential, while another part feared renewed interference in the life I had worked so hard to build. My artistic growth during this period reflected increasing confidence in my voice and vision as technical skills matured alongside emotional healing. The themes in my work expanded beyond family trauma to explore broader questions about identity, resilience, and the possibility of creating meaningful lives after devastating losses. These newer pieces attracted attention from critics who recognized artistic evolution that promised continued development and innovation in future work. The success I achieved felt meaningful because it had been earned honestly through talent, hard work, and perseverance that no one could take away or claim credit for creating. Unlike the achievements of my teenage years that had been dependent on family support and approval, this independence was built on foundations that belonged entirely to me. The knowledge that I had survived the worst they could do and emerged stronger than before provided confidence that would sustain me through whatever challenges lay ahead. At 25, I had achieved a level of artistic success that seemed impossible during those desperate early years of exile. My paintings were featured in galleries throughout the Pacific Northwest, my freelance design work included major corporate clients, and my relationship with Jake had evolved into discussions of marriage and shared futures that filled me with hope I had never expected to feel again. The life I had built felt solid and permanent, protected by distance and time from the family who had rejected me so completely. The encounter that would shatter this carefully constructed piece happened during a weekend trip to Seattle, where Jake and I were attending the opening of a group exhibition featuring several Pacific Northwest artists. The gallery was crowded with collectors, critics, and fellow artists celebrating the diverse talents represented in the show. I was discussing my latest series with a potential collector when I heard a familiar voice that made my blood freeze in recognition and terror. Mrs. Chen, our former neighbor from Connecticut, stood just a few feet away, examining one of my paintings with obvious admiration and interest. She had aged in the intervening years, but her voice remained unmistakable as she commented to her companion about the emotional power and technical skill displayed in the work. When she turned and saw me standing nearby, her expression shifted from polite gallery interest to complete shock and disbelief. The conversation that followed felt like stepping through a portal back to a past I had tried desperately to escape. Mrs. Chen's initial joy at seeing me alive and apparently thriving quickly gave way to confusion and distress as she began sharing information that made no sense given what I thought my family knew about my whereabouts and circumstances. According to her, my parents had been told that I had died in a car accident 2 years earlier, and they had grieved my death with genuine devastation that had aged them dramatically. The revelation that my family believed I was dead hit me like a physical blow that left me struggling to breathe normally. Mrs. Chen described my mother's breakdown at my supposed funeral, my father's declining health following the news of my death, and the family's struggle to cope with grief that had consumed their lives for months. The idea that they had mourned me while I lived successfully, just 3 states away, seemed impossible to comprehend or accept. Jake, who had never heard the full details of my family estrangement, listened with growing horror as Mrs. Chen described the elaborate deception that had convinced an entire community of my death. The funeral had included an empty casket, memorial donations to art education programs, and a scholarship fund established in my name to help other young artists achieve their dreams. The sincerity of their grief, as described by someone who had witnessed it firsthand, made it clear that my parents had been victims rather than willing participants in my disappearance. The decision to hire a private investigator felt both necessary and terrifying, because uncovering the truth would require reopening wounds that had taken years to heal while potentially exposing me to renewed attacks from whoever had orchestrated such an elaborate deception. Detective Ray Morrison came highly recommended for his work with missing persons cases, and his initial assessment of the situation confirmed that the level of systematic deception involved suggested professional planning and execution. The first discovery that emerged from Detective Morrison's investigation was evidence of systematic mail interception that had prevented any of my letters, cards, or attempted communications from reaching my parents over the past 7 years. Every birthday card, Christmas letter, and attempt to reconcile had been diverted and destroyed before my family could receive them. The postal fraud involved was extensive and technically sophisticated, requiring knowledge of mail handling procedures that suggested inside assistance or careful research. More disturbing was the evidence of identity theft that had been ongoing since before my 18th birthday. Brittany had been systematically forging my signature on legal documents, financial forms, and official communications that would have established my whereabouts and well-being if they had reached their intended recipients. The level of planning and execution required for such comprehensive fraud demonstrated criminal sophistication that went far beyond simple sibling rivalry or jealousy. The investigation revealed that Brittany had married a wealthy businessman named David Mitchell 3 years earlier, using identity documents and background information that belonged partially to me. Her wedding announcement in the local newspaper included biographical details about her childhood and achievements that were actually my accomplishments, rewritten to support her fictional background. The marriage had provided her with social status and financial security that would have been threatened by my return, or any evidence that contradicted her carefully constructed persona. Detective Morrison's research uncovered years of interference with private investigation efforts that my parents had funded in their desperate search for their missing daughter. Brittany had sabotaged these professional searches by providing false information about my possible whereabouts, suggesting that I might be involved with dangerous people or criminal activities that would make finding me difficult and potentially harmful to the family's reputation. The extent of my parents' efforts to locate me was overwhelming evidence of love and concern that contradicted everything I had believed about their willingness to disown and abandon me. They had hired multiple private investigators, consulted with police departments in several states, and even worked with a specialized firm that located missing persons who had deliberately disappeared to escape family problems. The time, money, and emotional energy they had invested in these searches proved that their love for me had never diminished despite the lies they had been told about my character. The second near defeat came when I realized that 13 years of my life had been stolen by someone who should have protected and supported me during the most vulnerable period of adolescence and early adulthood. The rage and heartbreak that followed this revelation felt like grieving for a person I might have become if I had received the family support that was rightfully mine. The education, opportunities, and relationships that had been sacrificed to Brittany's jealousy represented losses that could never be fully recovered or compensated. Learning that my parents had tried to find me for years, while I believed they had rejected me permanently, created a complex mixture of relief and anguish that was almost impossible to process. The joy of discovering that their love had been real and constant was overshadowed by anger at the years of unnecessary separation and suffering that had resulted from Brittany's systematic deception. The time that had been lost could never be reclaimed, and the people we had become during this separation were different from who we might have been together. The evidence that Detective Morrison compiled created a compelling case that Brittany had committed multiple felonies, including mail fraud, identity theft, filing false police reports, and conspiracy to commit various crimes with the assistance of her accomplices. The criminal charges that could be filed would likely result in significant prison time and financial penalties that would destroy the life she had built on foundations of lies and stolen identity. The decision about how to proceed required careful consideration of multiple factors, including my desire for justice, my need for healing, and my family's well-being after years of manipulation and abuse. Detective Morrison warned that pursuing criminal charges would involve lengthy legal proceedings that would be emotionally exhausting and potentially traumatic for everyone involved. However, allowing such extensive criminal behavior to continue unpunished would enable Brittany to potentially target other victims or escalate her activities if she felt threatened by my return. The choice between revenge and healing would ultimately determine not only Brittany's fate, but also my own future relationships with family members who had been as much victims of her deception as I had been. The person I had become during these years of exile valued justice, but also understood that some victories could be more costly than defeat if they required sacrificing the principles and values that had sustained me through the darkest periods of my journey. At 26, armed with irrefutable evidence of systematic deception and criminal fraud, I made the decision to return to Connecticut for the first time in 8 years. The folder of documents that Detective Morrison had compiled told a story of manipulation, so comprehensive and cruel that it seemed like fiction rather than the reality of my own life. Every piece of evidence represented another layer of betrayal that had stolen years of relationship with parents who had never stopped loving me despite the lies they had been told about my character and choices. The drive from Portland to Connecticut took 4 days, providing time to mentally prepare for confrontations that would forever change the dynamics of every family relationship. Jake insisted on accompanying me, recognizing that facing this magnitude of deception and trauma alone would be dangerous for my emotional stability and physical safety. His presence provided anchor points of support when the overwhelming nature of returning home threatened to destabilize the confidence I had built over years of independence and success. My father Richard was in Hartford Hospital when we arrived, recovering from his second heart attack in 3 years. The toll that grief and stress had taken on his health was visible in his gaunt appearance and the careful way he moved when nurses helped him sit up in bed. When I appeared in his hospital room doorway, his initial expression of confusion gave way to joy so profound that it triggered another cardiac episode that required immediate medical intervention. The medical crisis that followed my father's recognition created hours of uncertainty while doctors worked to stabilize his condition and ensure that the emotional shock hadn't caused permanent damage to his already weakened heart. Mom arrived at the hospital still unaware that her supposedly dead daughter was the reason for Dad's sudden deterioration, and her reaction to seeing me alive was equally devastating. The collapse that followed required sedation and psychiatric consultation to help her process grief, joy, and confusion that seemed too complex for human consciousness to manage simultaneously. The reunion that should have been purely joyful was complicated by years of accumulated trauma, guilt, and loss that couldn't be instantly healed by physical presence and tearful embraces. My parents aged visibly during our first conversation, as they began to understand the extent of deception that had separated us for so many years. The realization that their daughter had been alive and struggling while they grieved her death created guilt and anger that was almost impossible to bear. The evidence I presented painted a picture of systematic manipulation that challenged everything they thought they knew about family dynamics and their own judgment as parents. The forged signatures, intercepted mail, false police reports, and elaborate schemes that had convinced them of my death required careful explanation and documentation that took hours to review completely. With each new revelation, their expressions shifted between heartbreak for the daughter they had lost and rage at the child who had stolen her from them. Brittany's final desperate attempts to maintain control of the narrative she had created for 8 years involved strategies that revealed the depth of her psychological problems and criminal sophistication. When she learned that I had returned and was presenting evidence of her crimes to our parents, she immediately began implementing contingency plans that she had apparently developed years earlier in case her deceptions were ever discovered. Her first response was to claim that I was an imposter hired by someone who wanted to destroy our family's happiness and reputation. According to this new version of events, the real Madison had indeed died in a car accident, but criminals had somehow obtained enough information about our family to create a convincing fake daughter who would inherit Dad's estate and disappear with family assets. This explanation required dismissing DNA evidence, childhood scars, and intimate family memories that only the real Madison could possibly know. When the imposter theory failed to gain traction with parents who recognized their daughter despite 8 years of separation and growth, Brittany escalated to claims that I was suffering from severe mental illness that had caused me to create false memories and delusional beliefs about being persecuted by family members who had only tried to help me. She demanded that I be committed for psychiatric evaluation and treatment, presenting herself as the concerned sister who was trying to protect both me and our parents from my dangerous psychological condition. The allies who emerged to support my credibility and contradict Brittany's desperate lies included Dr. Martinez, who traveled from California to provide testimony about my mental health during the period when our family believed I was struggling with behavioral problems. Her professional assessment confirmed that I had been a victim of psychological abuse rather than a perpetrator of family problems. Detective Morrison presented evidence of criminal activities that could not be explained by mental illness or false memories. The legal battle that developed as Brittany fought to avoid accountability for her crimes became a public spectacle that attracted media attention throughout Connecticut. The story of a young woman who had faked her sister's death to steal her inheritance and identity captured public imagination, while providing daily reminders of how completely our family had been manipulated by someone we had trusted completely. The courtroom proceedings revealed additional victims who had been harmed by Brittany's schemes over the years. Troy Henderson testified about his participation in evidence planting and harassment activities, seeking a reduced sentence in exchange for cooperation with prosecutors. Jessica admitted to spreading false rumors and providing false statements to investigators, claiming that she had been intimidated and manipulated by Brittany's threats and emotional manipulation. Mr. Patterson, the married family friend, who had been involved in the inappropriate relationship that led to Brittany's fake pregnancy scare, was forced to acknowledge his role in providing alibis and false information that had supported Brittany's version of events. His admission destroyed his marriage and professional reputation, while providing additional evidence of the complex web of lies and manipulation that had surrounded every aspect of Brittany's scheme. The complete breakdown that Brittany experienced when faced with irrefutable evidence of her crimes and the testimony of former allies who had abandoned her was both satisfying and heartbreaking to witness. The person who had seemed so confident and in control throughout our childhood was revealed as someone whose entire identity had been built on lies, manipulation, and the systematic destruction of other people's happiness. During her final court appearance, Brittany's attempts to garner sympathy by claiming that jealousy and mental illness had driven her to make poor choices fell flat, with a judge who had reviewed extensive evidence of premeditated criminal activity that had spanned more than a decade. The sentence of 12 years in federal prison for mail fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy charges reflected the seriousness of crimes that had destroyed multiple lives through calculated cruelty rather than momentary poor judgment. The moment when I could have testified in favor of maximum penalties for someone who had stolen 8 years of my life and caused immeasurable suffering to our entire family became a test of the person I had become during years of exile and recovery. The choice between revenge and mercy would define not only Brittany's future, but also my own character and the values I would carry forward into whatever relationship with our parents remained possible after so much damage had been done. At 27, I stand in the luminous arts gallery surrounded by paintings that chronicle a journey from betrayal to triumph, watching visitors connect emotionally with artwork born from the darkest period of my life, but transformed into something beautiful and meaningful. The exhibition titled Reclaimed, A Study in Survival and Forgiveness, represents not only my artistic evolution, but also the completion of a healing process that began in a hospital room where my father recognized his supposedly dead daughter just weeks before his own death. Dad's passing 3 months after our reunion created a complex grief that mixed joy for our restored relationship with sorrow for all the years we had lost to Brittany's deception. His final weeks were spent learning about the woman I had become during our separation, and his pride in my artistic achievements and personal resilience provided the validation I had craved throughout years of believing I had disappointed him irreparably. The letter he left for me, discovered after his funeral, revealed that he had never stopped investigating Brittany's claims about my behavior, and had begun to suspect her involvement in my disappearance long before the truth was finally revealed. The will that named me sole beneficiary of his $12 million estate came with a letter explaining his decision to exclude Brittany from inheritance based on evidence he had quietly gathered about her deceptions over the years. His investigation had uncovered financial irregularities, forged documents, and suspicious circumstances that had convinced him to change his will without informing either daughter of his suspicions. The inheritance represented not just financial security, but also paternal recognition that I had been wronged and deserved compensation for years of stolen opportunities and relationships. My decision about the inheritance reflected values I had developed during years of independence and self-reliance that made personal wealth less important than social impact and community contribution. Rather than keeping money that felt tainted by the circumstances that had separated us, I established the Madison Harper Foundation for at-risk youth, providing art therapy programs, educational scholarships, and support services for young people experiencing family dysfunction or abuse. The Foundation's work allows me to transform personal trauma into social healing by helping others navigate challenges similar to those that nearly destroyed my own life. Every scholarship recipient who attends art school represents a victory over the forces of jealousy and manipulation that had tried to prevent my own educational aspirations. The art therapy programs provide tools for emotional processing and healing that I wish had been available during my own darkest periods of isolation and despair. The legal consequences that Brittany faced for her crimes provided justice, without requiring me to pursue maximum penalties that would have satisfied my desire for revenge, but contradicted my commitment to healing and forgiveness. The 12-year federal prison sentence reflected the seriousness of her systematic criminal activity, while allowing for the possibility of rehabilitation and redemption if she chose to take responsibility for her actions and seek treatment for underlying psychological issues. During the sentencing hearing, I testified not for additional punishment, but for court-ordered psychological treatment that might help Brittany understand and address the personality disorders that had driven her to such elaborate and cruel deceptions. My statement emphasized that while justice was necessary for closure and prevention of future victims, revenge would not restore the years we had lost or heal the damage that had been done to our family relationships. Brittany's social isolation following her conviction and imprisonment represented natural consequences of betraying everyone who had trusted and supported her over the years. Friends who had believed her version of family events distanced themselves when the truth emerged. Her marriage ended in divorce when her criminal activities became public knowledge, and extended family members struggled to reconcile their memories of the charming golden child with evidence of systematic manipulation and abuse. The relationship with my mother that has slowly rebuilt over the past year represents both the possibility of healing and the permanent scars left by years of separation and mistrust. Her guilt about believing Brittany's lies and failing to protect me from abuse has required professional counseling and patient work to address. Our conversations now include acknowledgments of past failures alongside commitments to honest communication and mutual respect that had been absent from family dynamics during my teenage years. Jake's proposal 6 months after the trial represented his understanding that my past trauma was part of who I am without being the only thing that defines my worth or potential for happiness. His patience during the legal proceedings and emotional upheaval that followed my family reunion demonstrated commitment to our relationship that went beyond initial attraction or shared interests. Our wedding plans include traditions that honor both families while creating new customs that reflect our journey together. The artistic evolution that has occurred since my return to Connecticut shows work that explores themes of redemption, forgiveness, and the possibility of creating meaningful lives after devastating betrayals. These newer paintings attract collectors who recognize technical maturity alongside emotional depth that promises continued development and innovation. The shift from purely personal trauma toward universal themes of resilience and healing reflects my own growth from survivor to someone who can help others navigate similar challenges. Elena Rodriguez's continued mentorship has expanded to include business partnerships that allow me to use artistic success as a platform for social advocacy and community education about family dysfunction and abuse recognition. Gallery exhibitions now include educational components that help viewers understand the warning signs of systematic manipulation and resources for seeking help when family relationships become toxic or dangerous. The therapy sessions that continue with Dr. Sarah Chen focus on maintaining healthy boundaries in relationships while remaining open to genuine connection and trust with people who have earned it through consistent behavior over time. Healing from systematic betrayal requires ongoing attention to psychological health and self-care that prevents past trauma from contaminating present relationships with fear and suspicion. The first life lesson that emerged from this journey is that truth always surfaces eventually, no matter how elaborate the lies or how long deception continues. Brittany's ability to maintain her false narratives for 8 years required enormous energy and constant vigilance that ultimately became impossible to sustain when faced with professional investigation and evidence that contradicted her carefully constructed version of events. The second essential lesson involves the difference between forgiveness and reconciliation, understanding that choosing peace over revenge doesn't require maintaining relationships with people who have demonstrated their willingness to cause harm for personal gain. Forgiveness can be a personal decision that promotes healing without necessarily leading to restored trust or ongoing contact with those who have betrayed that trust systematically. The third crucial insight concerns the difference between biological family and chosen family, recognizing that meaningful relationships are built on mutual respect, honest communication, and genuine care rather than shared genetics or legal obligations. The people who supported me during years of exile and recovery proved more loyal and trustworthy than relatives who abandoned me based on lies they chose to believe without investigation. The Foundation's success in helping other young people navigate family trauma and educational challenges provides daily reminders that personal suffering can be transformed into social healing when channeled through service and advocacy. Every scholarship recipient who achieves their educational goals represents victory over forces that try to destroy young people's potential through abuse, neglect, or systematic sabotage. Looking toward the future, I see possibilities for continued growth, meaningful relationships, and artistic work that contributes positively to community healing and social understanding of family dysfunction patterns. The gallery where I now stand represents not just personal success, but also a platform for helping others recognize their own worth and potential despite temporary setbacks or family rejection. The question I want to leave with you today is this. When you've experienced deep betrayal from people who should have protected you, how do you choose between revenge and healing? Have you ever discovered that someone you trusted was systematically working against your success and happiness? I'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences in the comments below, because these stories of survival and resilience remind us that we're not alone in facing family challenges that seem impossible to overcome. If this story resonated with you or helped you understand your own family dynamics better, please give it a like and share it with someone who might need to hear that survival and success are possible even after devastating betrayals. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories about overcoming family trauma and building meaningful lives despite difficult beginnings. Thank you for joining me on this incredible journey from destruction to healing. And remember that your worth is not determined by how others choose to treat you, but by who you decide to become despite their actions. Sometimes the family that hurts us most teaches us how to love ourselves deepest, and that hard-earned self-knowledge becomes the foundation for creating the life we truly deserve.